September 10th, 2025, 2:30 p.m. A normal afternoon on the Utah Valley University campus. About 3,000 young people had gathered to listen to 31-year-old Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, Trump's closest young ally, takes the stage. He smiles at the cameras, adjusts his microphone, and begins speaking. Just 20 minutes later, with the sound of a single gunshot, America's political history would change forever. This isn't just an assassination story. This is the anatomy of how a democracy tears itself apart. No one will ever forget that moment. As Kirk was answering a question about transgender rights, a shadow on the rooftop was taking motionless aim. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson's finger was on the trigger. His grandfather had left him this rifle as an inheritance, but Robinson had very different plans in mind. The bullet hits Kirk's neck, and in that moment, as thousands of students scream, the cameras are still rolling. Security guards panic. As ambulance sirens echo, Robinson tries to escape from the rooftop. Utah Governor Spencer Cox defines the incident as a political assassination, while reactions from Washington have already begun. Trump blames the radical left. Flags are lowered to half-staff, and America awakens once again in the shadow of violence. But the true dimensions of this story have yet to be seen. This wasn't an isolated incident. Since 2024, America has been experiencing something like a political violence epidemic. According to data from START researcher Michael Jensen, 150 politically motivated attacks occurred in the first 6 months of 2025. That means a 100% increase from the previous year. 2 assassination attempts on Trump, the killing of 2 state legislators in Minnesota, an attack on the Pennsylvania governor's residence. Each is a separate tragedy, but when considered together, they paint a horrifying picture. Jensen's words, "I wasn't surprised at all by this type of killing," sound harsh, but reflect reality. Political violence in America is no longer the exception, it's becoming the rule. Kirk's death became a new peak in this trend. The media immediately went into breaking news mode. The combined viewership of Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN increased by 65%. Everyone was asking the same question: how did this become so normal? But what was truly shocking was what happened after Kirk's death. Jimmy Kimmel's seemingly innocent comments became a living example of how free speech could collapse in America. Kimmel said on his Monday night show that MAGA circles were trying to portray Kirk's killer as anything other than one of them. That was all, but these words triggered a chain of events that would forever change the balance of power between media and politics in America. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr described Kimmel's words on Benny Johnson's podcast as part of a concerted effort to lie to the American people. This wasn't just criticism, it was an open threat. Carr called on local TV stations to review their partnerships with ABC. Behind the scenes, there were much bigger economic pressures. Nexstar was awaiting FCC approval for a $6.2 billion merger deal. Sinclair similarly couldn't risk its relationships with regulatory agencies. The result? First, Nexstar, then Sinclair announced they were suspending Kimmel's program for the foreseeable future. ABC, also considering Disney's history of a $15 million Trump lawsuit settlement, indefinitely removed Kimmel from the air. According to Rolling Stone sources, Disney executives thought Kimmel hadn't crossed the line, but the Trump administration's threat of retaliation was too powerful. This was just the beginning. Stephen Colbert's The Late Show was also canceled for financial reasons, but everyone knew Trump hated Colbert. CBS had paid $16 million for approval of the Paramount merger. Now it was time for other critical voices. Trump celebrated Kimmel's cancellation, writing on social media, "Two total losers like Jimmy and Seth are left on fake news NBC." It was at this exact point that the story took a much darker turn. Because the problem wasn't just TV shows. Thousands of ordinary Americans began losing their jobs because of their comments about Kirk. Teachers, firefighters, military personnel, even Secret Service members. Anyone who made negative comments about Kirk's death on social media became a target. Far-right activists like Laura Loomer began sharing personal information of people who celebrated Kirk's death. The organization, called Expose Charlie's Murderers, later rebranded as the Charlie Kirk Data Foundation, created a blacklist of 63,000 people. This list targeted not just famous names, but ordinary citizens. A woman working at a mental health company in Melbourne was fired for describing Kirk as a human water fountain. A teacher in Florida faced the threat of losing her license for saying "bad things happen to bad people" about Kirk's death. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' education commissioner issued a clear warning about the situation. Teachers making disgusting comments about Kirk's assassination could have their licenses suspended or even completely revoked. This wasn't just a threat. Within a few days, 47 teachers were under investigation. A firefighter in Michigan was suspended for asking, "Who is Kirk that he's so important?" A Secret Service agent in Colorado received disciplinary action for calling Kirk a political opportunist. In this atmosphere, Trump took things even further. While declaring Antifa a terrorist organization, he described it as a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization. He announced that those funding this organization would be thoroughly investigated according to the highest legal standards. At the same time, he implied that this decision would have practical consequences beyond its symbolic value. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Chase Bank announced they were beginning to review accounts suspected of Antifa connections, but this decision had no legal basis. As former FBI Director Christopher Wray stated in his 2020 congressional testimony, Antifa is not an organization, but an ideology. There is no legal basis for defining domestic terrorist organizations, and it conflicts with the First Amendment. Legal experts were concerned that this would be used as a broad tool to silence dissenting views, beyond just a symbolic move. Their fears were justified. The number of people fired daily with the label Antifa sympathizer exceeded 200. Student associations were shut down at universities. Civil society organizations learned their donation accounts were frozen. George Soros's Open Society Foundations suspended its activities in America. Experts were rightfully concerned that this step would actually be used to suppress dissenting views. Because according to data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, left-wing motivated attacks constitute a small portion of total terrorist incidents. 57% of politically motivated attacks in the last 5 years have come from right-wing terrorism. Left-wing attacks remain at 13%. The remaining 30% consists of isolated cases without clear ideological lines. Robinson's story reveals the complex nature of radicalization. This 22-year-old from a conservative family had completely changed his political views in the last year. Robinson's mother told the FBI in her statement that her son had shifted hard, left politically in the last year, and had become extremely passionate about LGBT rights. He had a relationship with a transgender partner, and this relationship increased tension at home. Robinson described his father as die-hard MAGA and himself as the complete opposite. Robinson's computer history bore traces of the radicalization process. Hours spent on Fortune and Reddit showed he was gravitating toward increasingly extreme content. Discord conversations revealed he had planned the attack for more than a week. In his messaging with his partner, he wrote, "I have the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it." On the day of the attack, he worried, "I have to bring back Grandpa's rifle. I don't know what Dad will do." Utah Attorney General Jeffrey Gray described the messages Robinson sent to his partner after the attack. "Was it you? Was it in your hands?" To which Robinson replied, "It was me. I'm sorry." DNA evidence also supported this confession. Robinson's DNA was found on the trigger part of the bolt-action rifle inherited from his grandfather. Fingerprints were also detected on the towel and screwdriver found on the roof. When Robinson's family realized the situation, it was already too late. When his mother saw the FBI photos, she said she recognized her son and wanted to question him. When Robinson said he wanted to kill himself, the family convinced him to call a family friend who was a retired sheriff's deputy. On the evening of September 11th, he turned himself in to the Washington County Sheriff's Department. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer saw this incident as an opportunity to question the role of online platforms in radicalization. He called Discord, Reddit, Twitch, and Steam CEOs to Congress. Discord was understandable because Robinson had actually planned the attack on the platform. Reddit was also on the list due to Robinson's messages in the r/politics and r/LGBT rights forums where he was active. But Steam's inclusion surprised everyone. What could Valve Corporation's video game platform have to do with political radicalization? Yet, X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms where political discussions actually take place intensively weren't on the list. Twitch streamer Hassan Piker commented on the situation, saying, "It's obvious why they're targeting Twitch, because they want to silence their ideological opponents." Rod Breslau summarized the situation. The government is scapegoating social media, chat, and video games under the guise of preventing political radicalization. The goal is to censor the internet. Free speech advocates support this because they want certain streamers banned due to personal vendettas. In this chaotic environment, a silent but fundamental revolution was taking place in health policy. With RFK Jr.'s appointment as health secretary, the CDC's vaccine advisory panel had completely changed. This panel, called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, plays a critical role in determining America's vaccine policies. CDC recommendations are almost never rejected, and this panel prepares those recommendations. The old experts were fired and replaced with vaccine skeptics. At the new panel's first meeting, committees were formed to review the childhood vaccination schedule. Proposals began for age restrictions on MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella chickenpox vaccines. Suggestions were on the table, such as not administering these vaccines to children under 5 and not giving them to school-age children without parental consent. Pediatric experts warned this would be a disaster for child health. Dr. Peter Hotez from Baylor College of Medicine summarized the seriousness of the situation. "I've been working on childhood vaccines for 25 years. These policy changes could lead to child deaths not seen since the 1950s. Even the return of polio outbreaks is possible." The FDA expressed similar concerns. The decision to recommend updated COVID vaccines only for those over 65 and at-risk groups was evaluated by scientists as a decision lacking factual basis and posing serious risk. East and West Coast states reacted to these developments. The West Coast Health Alliance, led by California Governor Gavin Newsom and the Northeast Public Health Collaborative, headed by Kathy Hochul, began preparing their own scientific recommendations against federal advice. 7 states, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island, were openly defying federal authority. At the meeting in New York, Hochul said, "If the federal government rejects science, we as a state will protect our citizens." California made similar statements, announcing they would provide much broader access to COVID, flu, and RSV vaccines than federal recommendations. This indicated that health policies in America would be divided on a state-by-state basis. Kirk's death deepened these conflicts even further. The atmosphere of political violence became a tool to silence all kinds of opposition. Doctors and scientists criticizing RFK Jr.'s policies also began being declared traitors. The head of the American Medical Association faced accusations of supporting Charlie Kirk's killer simply for expressing concerns about childhood vaccines. Even Tucker Carlson realized the seriousness of the situation. On his Fox News program, he said, "We hope that Charlie Kirk's death won't be used by bad actors to create a society that's the opposite of what he tried to build." He warned, "If hate speech laws come to this country, there will never be a more justified moment for civil disobedience. Robert J. Dole Institute expert. Mr. Beat's predictions were grim. The next 2 years are going to suck. Our leadership isn't trying to unite us, they're just using division for their own interests. Beat said the situation could improve within 7 to 10 years, citing crisis periods in the 1960s, 1890s, and 1930s. But first, it was necessary to sink into deeper chaos. Beat's historical analysis was striking. In the 1960s, we had the Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy assassinations, but the Civil Rights Act also passed in the same period. In the 1890s, there was economic chaos, but progressive-era reforms came. In the 1930s, there was the Great Depression, but New Deal programs were created. Crisis periods are also times of great change, but the current situation carried different elements from past crises. The concept of stochastic terrorism had now moved from academic literature to become part of daily life. This term describes how political rhetoric, even if it doesn't directly incite violence, can create an atmosphere that could lead sensitive individuals toward violence. Professor David Smith from Georgetown University explains the situation. Now it's enough to say, person X is a danger to the country to target them. It's enough for one person among millions to perceive this as a call to action and resort to violence. Security concerns for political figures are increasing. Public events are beginning to be protected like military bases. Utah Valley University, where Kirk spoke, tripled campus security after the incident. Similar speaking events are now conducted with metal detectors, rooftop observers, and drone surveillance. Democracy was beginning to restrict its freedoms with the instinct of self-protection. However, what was truly concerning was the role of social media algorithms in this process. Robinson's online journey was a perfect example of how radicalization occurs. Robinson, who initially followed mainstream LGBT rights content, was exposed to increasingly extreme content through algorithmic guidance. Content like, Kirk is a fascist, Kirk is killing LGBT youth, action needed against Kirk, shaped his worldview. Dr. Zeynep Tufekci's research at MIT explains the technical dimension of this process. Algorithms recommend increasingly provocative content to keep users on the platform. This accelerates radicalization. Robinson's case shows the tragic consequences of this. Charlie Kirk's death didn't heal the cracks in America's democratic fabric, it deepened them further. Violence bred new violence. Free speech eroded under pressure from both government and private sector. Social media platforms became tools of censorship under government threat. Scientific institutions became ideological battlegrounds. But perhaps most tragic was that the values Kirk defended in life, free speech, civil debate, democratic participation, were systematically destroyed after his death. While his assassin tried to silence him, the system succeeded in permanently shutting down his voice. Kirk's words, "I'm fighting for free speech," ironically turned into the funeral bells of free speech with his death. Is there a way out of this situation? Experts aren't hopeful, but the struggle continues. Digital rights organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation are preparing to sue social media platforms. The American Civil Liberties Union is providing legal support for those fired. Some states are planning to strengthen political view discrimination laws. America's future lies in whether it can break this cycle. The reconstruction of civil discourse culture, increasing media literacy, and never legitimizing violence in any way is necessary. Because democracy can survive as long as there are people determined to protect it. Charlie Kirk's legacy is testing this determination, and so far, America is failing this test. What did you think of this analysis? Share your thoughts about the future of political violence in America in the comments. I'm curious about your views on how democratic institutions can be protected. Don't forget to subscribe for similar in-depth analyses.